In the long and brutal history of ancient China, warfare was not merely a clash of armies, but a test of endurance, loyalty, and moral boundaries. Sieges, in particular, were wars of waiting, slow, suffocating struggles where starvation often killed more people than swords. Among these grim episodes stands one story so shocking that it has echoed through Chinese historical texts for centuries, the account of a commander who, during a siege, allegedly fed his troops with the flesh of his own soldiers. This story is not legend in the mythical sense, but a recorded episode preserved in classical histories, debated by scholars, and remembered as a symbol of both extreme loyalty and moral collapse under pressure. The story is most commonly associated with General Zhang Sun during the Lushan rebellion of the Tang dynasty in the 8th century CE. This rebellion nearly destroyed one of China's greatest empires. What followed was not just a military crisis, but a humanitarian catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. Cities fell, millions died, and loyalty to the Tang throne was tested to its limits. Zhang Sun's defense of the city of Suiyang became legendary, not only for its heroism, but for the horrifying choices forced by starvation. The Lushan rebellion erupted in 755 CE when the general Lushan turned against the Tang dynasty, declaring himself emperor. His rebellion fractured the empire, plunging vast regions into chaos. Suiyang, a strategically vital city, became a critical defensive point. If it fell, rebel forces would gain a clear path to the south, potentially collapsing Tang resistance entirely. Zhang Sun, appointed to defend the city, knew that holding Suiyang meant buying time for the empire to regroup. Losing it would be disastrous. From the beginning, the siege was desperate. Rebel forces surrounded the city, cutting off supply routes. No reinforcements arrived. Food stores dwindled rapidly. At first, the defenders rationed grain carefully. Horses were slaughtered to feed soldiers, then dogs, then rats. As weeks turned into months, starvation became the primary enemy. Ancient siege warfare offered no mercy. Surrender often meant massacre. Zhang Sun chose resistance. Historical records describe Zhang Sun as fiercely loyal, uncompromising, and deeply committed to the Tang emperor. Confucian values placed loyalty to the state above life itself, and Zhang Sun embodied this ideal to an extreme degree. He believed that the survival of the empire justified any sacrifice. His men followed him not because they were ignorant of the danger, but because surrender was seen as betrayal. As food ran out entirely, the garrison faced annihilation. According to the Old Book of Tang and later historical commentaries, Zhang Sun made an unthinkable decision. He allegedly ordered that the bodies of fallen soldiers be used to feed the living. Later accounts go even further, claiming that some soldiers were killed specifically so others could eat. These details are heavily debated, but all surviving sources agree on one point: cannibalism occurred within the city. It is crucial to understand this within its historical context. Cannibalism during sieges was not unique to China. Similar events occurred in medieval Europe, the Middle East, and later in modern warfare. Starvation drives societies to extremes that are otherwise unimaginable. In Tang-era China, however, the moral implications were particularly heavy. Confucian ethics emphasize humaneness, ritual propriety, and moral conduct, even in war. Zhang Sun's actions therefore created a paradox. He was both celebrated as a loyal hero and condemned as a man who crossed ethical boundaries. What makes the story more disturbing is how it was framed by later historians. Some accounts describe Zhang Sun as weeping while making these decisions, fully aware of the horror involved. Others portray him as coldly pragmatic, prioritizing strategy over human cost. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Siege warfare does not produce villains or heroes easily. It produces survivors and victims. Despite the starvation and internal collapse, Suiyang did not fall quickly. The defenders held out for months longer than expected. This delay proved critical. Tang forces elsewhere regrouped, counterattacked, and eventually suppressed the rebellion. From a strategic standpoint, Zhang Sun succeeded. Suiyang's resistance changed the course of the war. When the city finally fell, almost everyone inside was dead. Zhang Sun was captured and executed by rebel forces. According to historical texts, even his enemies acknowledged his resolve. The Tang court later honored him posthumously. Temples were built. His name entered official history as a model of loyalty. Yet the moral discomfort never disappeared. Scholars for centuries argued over whether Zhang Sun should be admired or condemned. Some praised his willingness to sacrifice everything for the state. Others questioned whether loyalty justified dehumanization. Confucian commentators wrestled with the contradiction. Could an act so horrific still be righteous if it saved the empire? This debate reflects a broader truth about history. Extreme situations force societies to redefine morality. What is unthinkable in peace becomes possible in desperation. Zhang Sun's story survives because it sits at the edge of that moral boundary. It challenges simple judgments. It refuses to be comfortably categorized. Modern historians approach the story with caution. Some argue that later writers exaggerated elements to dramatize loyalty. Others believe the cannibalism occurred but was framed symbolically, emphasizing sacrifice rather than literal practice. Archaeological evidence is scarce, as is often the case with siege sites. What remains are texts, interpretations, and the psychological reality of starvation. Psychologically, starvation alters human behavior profoundly. Studies of famine survivors show impaired judgment, emotional numbing, and extreme decision-making. Under siege conditions, commanders operate under constant threat, responsibility for thousands of lives, and no acceptable outcomes. Zhang Sun's choice was not between good and evil, but between different forms of catastrophe. The phrase, "the man who ate his soldiers," persists because it shocks modern audiences. It violates taboos deeply embedded in human culture. Cannibalism is one of humanity's strongest moral boundaries, and stories that cross it are remembered long after others fade. But focusing only on the shock risks, missing the broader lesson. This was not a story about cruelty for its own sake. It was about the cost of absolute loyalty and the brutality of war systems that leave no humane options. In Chinese historical memory, Zhang Sun represents a warning as much as a hero. His story is taught not to glorify cannibalism, but to illustrate the extremity of wartime devotion and the human price of imperial survival. It asks uncomfortable questions. How much should individuals sacrifice for the state? When does obedience become moral collapse? And who bears responsibility when survival demands the unacceptable? Today, the ruins of ancient cities like Suiyang no longer echo with battle cries, but the questions raised by their history remain relevant. Modern warfare, despite technology, still produces sieges, blockades, and starvation. The ethical dilemmas faced by Zhang Sun are not confined to the past. They reappear wherever civilians and soldiers are trapped without escape. The Man Who Ate His Soldiers is not just a story about one commander. It is a mirror held up to humanity under pressure. It shows how thin the line is between civilization and collapse, and how quickly moral certainty dissolves when survival is at stake. History remembers Zhang Sun not because his actions were admirable, but because they were unforgettable. And perhaps that is the true curse of siege warfare, not that it kills bodies, but that it forces choices that haunt civilizations long after the walls have fallen.